In 1947, something crashed into the New Mexico desert. The official story? Weather balloon. But not everyone buys that explanation. Was it really just a balloon, or was it evidence of extraterrestrial contact that the government was trying to hide? Now, here's the thing. Roswell is just the beginning. Over the years, the government's stance on UFOs has shifted dramatically from outright denial to subtle acknowledgement. And get this, the story keeps changing. In recent years, we've seen declassified reports, admissions from military officials, and congressional hearings that hint at something far bigger than weather balloons. And now we have whistleblowers stepping forward again with startling new claims about what might be really out there and what the government is trying to keep us from knowing about. This time, the Immaculate Constellation. And that's coming up next, right here on Parker J. Cole Show. Hi, and welcome to the Parker J. Cole Show. As you can tell, I'm your host, Queen Parker J. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, most of you know this is my topic. I love talking about this from various angles. And with me today is my guest co-host and contributor, Zach Russell. Zach and I have been working together at Lorehaven for a number of years. We've worked together as writers, as collaborators, or just as people supporting each other's work. He's also a burgeoning author. He is a podcast host, which we'll talk about later, and so much more. I'm going to read just a little bit about him from his blog. Zackary Russel is a fighting Texas Augie and proud member of Generation X-Wing. From a young age, he traveled the Oregon Trail, explored the island of Mist, and conquered the dungeons of Hyrule. The worlds of Shannara, Middle Earth, and Shadowrun opened his imagination to impossible places. His journeys alongside Wesley Crusher,
Shut up, Wesley.
Connor, and Neo instilled a cautious fascination with all things technological.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
After plotting out a college degree in creative writing, Zachary soon switched to telecommunications engineering. During those days, he breathed in Wi-Fi and 3G signals. Oh my gosh. You are so old, Zach. Well, most of his friends were tied down to landline phones, but the world was slowly becoming digitized. And before it was captured by the giants of Silicon Valley, the internet used to be really fun. Zachary spent several years undercover in an undisclosed location, showing the beloved people how their own language points to a lamb who covers us with true righteousness. And one day, while wandering through a convenience store in Thailand, he spotted a beautiful young woman. Fellow missionary Naomi shared Zachary's heart for bringing the hope of Jesus to all nations. She captured his heart, and the next year they wed. Their journey of ministering together brought them closer to people from distant countries. International students at U.S. college campuses became apparent how these internationals longed for a better story. A main role Zachary adopted, therefore, became crafting stories that portray eternal hope in Christ. He's written screenplays such as Cabernet and The Stamp Collector, compiled documentary short films like Russian Fairy Tale, and penned voiceovers like Whole Campus, Whole World. Zachary and Naomi have welcomed four children to their home in Central Texas, where they are partners at Austin Stone Community Church. Zachary leads the Austin Christian Novelist Group and co-hosts the Fantastical Truth podcast. Zach, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is going to be awesome.
I can tell already, and we already get along, which is really helpful. But I didn't meet Zach in person until we met last year in St. Louis at Realm Makers. And it's so much different when you have that tactile connection with someone that you generally only connect with online. And to see you, baby, give you a hug, shake hands, break bread together, and just sit around and talk and discuss the things we already do talk about was so phenomenal. And we got to say, digital does bring us closer together, but there's nothing like meeting people in real life.
That's right. I really enjoyed the talks you gave about romance and why more stories should have romance. That kind of challenged me because I don't really think in those realms. I think more like in the technological realm and the scientific realm. But some of my favorite sci-fi stories also have a kind of a romance subplot. I mean, of course, Han and Leia, one of the best underrated romances of all time.
Oh
And
yeah.
of course, God has brought a great woman into my life, a bride of 19 years now, and he's really captured my heart through all the stories that he's told through our kids as a result of our marriage. So
It's fascinating because as a technical guy, this type of thing about aliens and about the supernatural, the paranormal, all collides together. And sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between what exactly is paranormal, what exactly is technical, what exactly is scientific. And you start to find out that these lines get blurred when we talk about our love for UFOs, UAPs as they're now called, and the things that go bump in the night, the things we just can't explain. And the reason why we wanted to talk about this is because the story has changed. Now, there are some people who are saying, well, it's not that the story has changed, it's become more clarified. Disagree with that because the government ridiculed people who said they saw things they could not explain. What are your thoughts about it, Zach?
yeah, that's kind of my opening thought here is that this is by design an uncomfortable topic for most people because it was designed to be that way. There was an official policy of stigma when this first started breaking the news, like you said, back in 1947, the 1950s and 60s, kind of the early days of the Cold War. And this is not so much my jam as others that have really studied the history of this, but essentially, the government was worried that the Soviet Union would take advantage of the UFO craze of kind of those early decades, and it would be used as either a distraction or maybe even an intentional deception, which would lower our situational awareness or national security, and essentially like a hoax. UFO could be used to distract us while another attack happened, and so, rightly or wrongly, they decided we should try to kind of ridicule this the topic and stigmatize it so that we don't take it seriously. We don't become afraid of it. I mean, again, it's sort of in the line of like we have nothing to fear but fear itself, right? Like that's kind of the American spirit. But because of that, for decades now, there have been military pilots and other personnel that have encountered very weird objects that are on radar, on infrared, on camera, and that they can, visibly see. And they don't know what these things are, but they seem to pose a threat of some kind. And they were really worried about losing their pilot's license. And then other people in the civilian sector, like you think of professors at Harvard, they're worried about losing their tenure if they start to study this. And just ordinary people, they're worried about looking like a crank if they talk about it. And so that's been the attitude culturally for a long time. And so it's not something that most people want to talk about. But I think it's also the fact that we might be dealing with not just unidentified flying objects, but unidentifiable and unsolvable mysteries. Like there may be no solving the mystery of Roswell, like you brought up, or the more recent Nimitz Tic Tac and from 2008, the one that broke the news in the New York Times, 60 Minutes, all the other major publications. There may actually be no way to know what these objects were, and that presents a kind of a challenge to most people. Like, well, why should I keep looking into this if I can never find an answer? Like, it might be impossible to find an answer, and it becomes sort of this black hole of mystery. And and then there's a lot of other challenges it presents, which we'll get into. And so it's a challenging topic, and it's a fun topic for that reason. I really like it because it's like there's so many possibilities, and that's kind of what I thrive on is just thinking through all the speculation. But I think it's also kind of fun because it's like, oh, well, not many people talk about that. Most people want to talk about news, sports, weather, politics, whatever. And But in the speculative fiction community, in the author community, in the reader community, yeah, this is a fun. It's an easy topic to talk about.
I think it's because it captures our imagination, particularly for me, because I am a diehard Trekkie. And going and meeting extraterrestrials from different planets who are dissimilar from myself is quite exciting. Doesn't frighten me, but some people are frightened by the idea of something I recently learned called Earth chauvinism, which
Mm.
basically posits the idea that Earth is special, that Earth has priority over cosmic observations, and that when we have this chauvinistic view of our own creation, we are not humbling ourselves to the idea that God, and this is, goes to our belief system, that God also has created other beings who are just as important to him as much as we are. And so when I heard this term, I had to consider, is that what we are expressing, an earth chauvinistic view of our understanding of the universe and of extraterrestrials? What do you think?
Yeah, there's a TED talk by a professor named Alexander Wendt, and he uses a similar phrase of human sovereignty is what's kind of being threatened by this topic. The idea that humans are the apex predator of the Earth or the galaxy. And so there's this fear that if we find out that UFOs are something that are non-human, that are a superior technology, superior species to us, then it means we're not the top dogs. We're not the top of the food chain. And that's pretty frightening. I think that's a pretty good human explanation because even if it all it means is that the Chinese or the Russians or the North Koreans or some, shadow government or secret society or, kind of like a dark SpaceX or something that exists out there that has technology way beyond the American military, that's also frightening because it means that America is not the world superpower. And so that's a very logical reason for why this topic is spooky. It's like we're getting into the Halloween season. This is a very spooky topic. And then there's the theological implications. Like, are we talking about something uh, that is beyond what the Bible, tells us about? And almost definitely. And but then you think of most technology that we have nowadays. It's also not really talked about in the Bible. The Bible is not the sum of all human knowledge and history and future events and prophecy. It is the core of what we need to know. It's everything we need to know for life and godliness, but it's not everything there is to know. And so sometimes that can even be a little bit of a trap. We think, well, if it's not in the Bible, it must not be real. Well, there's a lot of things that we found out about, like viruses that we didn't know about in the Bible, or even distant quasars. We both got the space background. There's so much about space that we didn't know in Bible times. Um, but I think that where I start with all of this is that in Genesis 1 it says he also made the stars, and that's what my shirt says. And it's a good reminder that whatever else is out there, if there is anything out there, it's something that God made along with everything else. And so it all fits within his sovereignty. It may not fit within our sovereignty. But when you look at history, everyone thought that they were the top dog until they weren't.
Exactly.
As
Hmm.
much as people want to do, land acknowledgments and things like that, it's like, well, pretty much every people group has displaced some other people group throughout all of history on every continent. And you even just look in the Bible, like the history of Israel, like we're going through First and Second Samuel right now in our family. And then we're going to be going into Kings and Chronicles and just like the constant war on that little piece of real estate. Yeah, it was this eternal, and it's still going on, right? And so, if you think about if you were, or look at it another way, if you were the people in North America when Columbus and the Spanish and the English and others came over, you thought you were the apex species because you'd conquered all the other species on this continent, and then someone else came and conquered you. So I think that's kind of the natural fear that we have. Like, what if these things don't like us? What if they are here for some very nefarious reasons? I kind of I don't know what to think about that, because it's like if there was already going to be an alien invasion and takeover like we see in the movies, I think it would have already happened by now, unless they're just really patient.
Well, that's what they call the Fermi's paradox, I believe, where the idea is that where are the aliens? Where are they? Because we've been here for a while, and if they were going to do it, they should have did it right now. And I think this also strengthens the idea that we are unique in the universe and that we do have a privilege to conquer and explore the depths of God's creation. Now, that's the other side of earth chauvinism, which is human sovereignty over creation. And I think we are so diverse in our thoughts and diverse in our capabilities that it is easy for us to imagine colonizing and expanding our stretch over the universe. That's why one of the reasons why I enjoy a lot of what Elon Musk propagates as it relates to becoming a multi-planetary civilization. I don't agree with all the things that he says. When he comes to this, he wants to expand our footprint in the universe. Now, what his motivations are probably has a lot to do with the limited resources he perceives that we may have on Earth and to get us, oh, I think in Elon's case, I think he wants us to focus on things not inwardly, outwardly, because there's so much to discover about the universe that if we can get off this rock and go discover them, then the things that currently divide us would pale in comparison to what's out there. Now, for me as a Christian and as a believer in God, I find that fascinating. I'm not leaving Earth though, because pioneers always die. Okay. The first people who make it to Mars, they're going to be goners. Let's just admit it. And God bless them when they make that trip. Okay. But the idea that there's so much more out there definitely appeals to me. And it doesn't frighten me, nor does it frighten my belief in God. But let's talk about that because we're going to get into the Immaculate Constellation gang, but we want to kind of give you some general thoughts and overview about this octopus of a topic, which
Yeah.
is UFOs. Well, now they're called UAPs, and more. And we'll talk about that too. So, in your opinion, Zach, how does each view, let's say human sovereignty as it relates to privilege and as it relates to the natural order, like you mentioned, where if we aren't in control, that someone else is, you know, and someone else with bigger power, or rather more power, more weaponry, more technology can conquer us. And that is fearful as opposed to we having the best technology out there and we're constantly growing that tech. How does that relate to the Christian theological construct?
So one passage I really like to think about as it relates to the aliens and UFO topic is Revelation 9, where it says, "The fifth angel blew his trumpet. I saw a star that had fallen from heaven to earth. The key for the shaft to the abyss was given to him. He opened the shaft to the abyss, and smoke came up out of the shaft like smoke from a great furnace." And then it goes on and talks about these locusts that come out of the smoke. They torture people for a very specific period of time, but they can't do other things, like they can't burn up the grass, but they also can't kill people, and people can't seem to escape them. And so it's a very weird passage. And of course, this is one of the most debated books of the Bible. Like, is all of this literal or is this metaphorical? But something we see there is that there is some kind of, if we just take it somewhat literally, there is some type of species that is more powerful than humanity, but less powerful than God. And God directed this to happen by the angel blowing this trumpet and pronouncing this judgment on the whole earth. And we see that it's not just a natural star. Like, obviously, if a star hit the earth, we'd be incinerated. I mean, that was the
Goners.
Yeah, that was
Honors.
the plot of The Wandering Earth by
Yes, I
Leo
love that
Sitchin.
story.
Yeah.
I love, well, I read the 1930s, The Wandering Earth. And
Okay.
then I saw the movie, The Wandering Earth, that came out a couple of years ago.
Right.
The original story from the 19, I'm sorry, not 1930s, 1920s was really good. We'll talk about it later, but yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Yeah, so it's some kind of heavenly body. It could be maybe a natural meteorite, but then it says he opened the shaft of the abyss, and it's like, is it just personification? I don't think so, but we know that it's not like an actual key. So there's some metaphor and there's some literal mixed in, but then these creatures come out, and it's very specific creatures, and they were given power to do some things but not other things. So what do we know? What do we see from this, and how does this relate? I think it's very possible that the flying saucers, the flying orbs, the other really weird like triangles and other things that people are seeing, this could all be some type of species. It could be a biological, technological, or a supernatural species that God is allowing to be here for some reason, but he puts certain limits around it. And it's like I said, we haven't had a alien 9/11 yet. We haven't had like an Independence Day type situation where they've just conquered everything. So if these are some kind of, extraterrestrial species, they exist and they operate within God's sovereign plan. And and really this is what we see throughout the entire Bible. We see it in the book of Job. We see Satan being given a certain amount of freedom or flexibility to harm Job, but then there's certain limits placed on him, and but he has immense power, like he causes a tornado or something. And and yet we see that God is sovereign and ultimately God gets the glory through that whole thing. And so what I would say about your question about human sovereignty is uh, human sovereignty is in a sense a myth. Like we don't have sovereignty because God, first of all, God exists. And God is the ultimate sovereign. But then God has these other beings. I mean, we see an angel for sure. And then we see these, whatever this star is. And then we see whatever these locusts are. So God has created other intelligent beings besides humans. And they have more power and technology or whatever than us. But they also have certain limits. And, this is just the reality of the whole Bible.
Think too, when we talk about other beings, I don't believe they have the same numbers that we have as well.
Mm.
Because in the Bible, he specifically speaks to mankind and says, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? These other beings, and one I'm going to be talking about is Bigfoot. I've been listening to podcasts about people who have interacted with Bigfoot
Mm-hmm.
in some form and people who have had connections with them, who've grown with them, and they're very much connected to the indigenous cultures around the world. Bigfoot is. For those of you who don't know, Bigfoot is Sasquatch. Um, some people think ape man. They actually think they are a higher people. Sort of like if I can go to speculative fiction, how the Numenorians are high man, then you have men, they have elves, dwarves. So Bigfoot would be higher people with probably better technology than we have and a similarity that I've discovered with some of these interactions that people have had is the idea that they are here to work as engineers for UFOs that have landed on the planet. The Bigfoot are able to shift their frequency so they can not be seen. And if they are seen, they make a decided choice to be seen. Now, some of this sounds like um, swallowing Tide Pods. And I fully understand that. But this is why the skepticism, I think, is necessary, but also why people don't talk about it. Because when they talk about it, they sound crazy. And I think this is the fault of the GOV because they made the topic taboo. You got canceled before being canceled on social media was a thing. The government would cancel, people would cancel you. You sound absolutely crazy. And like one man said, if this stuff is true, we really need to know. People need to be educated if there are beings out there trying to conquer our world. We need to be prepared. We can't depend on the government. Maybe someone, the little backwoods boy from Louisiana could come with something to, save the planet. So that's why all of these things become muddied in the conversation. I use Bigfoot because that's one I've been recently devouring. A friend of mine is doing investigations into Bigfoot, and he's been sharing videos with me. And so it's been very intriguing to see some of the ideas about higher beings, higher people, such as Bigfoot. Now, let's take it a step further. If we're talking about extraterrestrials who are coming to Earth, they're coming to Earth, I would think they would have different views about faith, morality. They would have different views of many different things like we see on shows like Star Trek. Star Trek does a really good job of depicting alien creatures with dissimilar ideas than what prevails with other cultures. However, there has been interactions and experiences with people who have dealt with extraterrestrials that have been quite frightening. And they have been decidedly anti-Christian God and anti-theology. So how does this further muddy up the discussion about UFOs, extraterrestrial beings, and faith?
That's a great question. There does seem to be a connection to occult type practices with a lot of these encounters. I was just listening to a YouTuber yesterday. He was really excited about these UFO videos that he was seeing. There was I can't remember the town this was in, but there were multiple videos from multiple unconnected people of these lights that would like appear and disappear in these weird patterns in the sky. Now, could it be Chinese lanterns? Could it be drones? Could it be some kind of weather phenomenon like ball lightning? Sure, those are all possibilities. But when you start to connect a lot of these stories together, there does seem to be some kind of intentionality behind all of these encounters. Uh, and especially when it comes to something I definitely do not recommend, but it's this practice of CE5. So close encounters of the fifth kind, which is essentially people trying to summon UFOs or summon, these glowing orbs or whatever. There's another YouTuber that talked about this and he tried this and he said he saw these three orbs circling each other when he meditated or whatever. And then it apparently it left a scar on his arm. And then he thought, maybe I shouldn't be doing this.
Not a great plan.
I'm like, yeah, we have entire chapters of the Bible about why this is a bad idea, trying to summon supernatural or whatever beings. So that is kind of the other inescapable dimension to this, why it becomes an uncomfortable topic for Christians, because look, UFOs could be a lot of things, actually. There could be a lot of different explanations. And one of them could be supernatural beings that are evil, that, fallen angels, Nephilim spirits, whatever people want to call them. There could be something really sinister about all of this. And then so when, and that's actually one of the reasons for the government cover up that this came out originally in the 2017, 2018 era. There was basically a whistleblower from the Pentagon that said, look, there is a faction of the Pentagon that is he just said, very religious, and that had very strong religious objections to the government studying this because they thought it was demonic and they didn't want people to get harmed, or they didn't want, people summoning like demons. And they thought that this is bad for humanity and bad for the government. And perhaps some very legitimate concerns there. So, and then there's just the encounters like the sort of combine all of these things. Like, have you heard of Skinwalker Ranch? There's a TV
Skinwalker
show.
Ranch, Skinwalker Ranch is fascinating. I
Yeah,
will never go. but it is
Exactly. I'll never
absolutely
go there either.
bad. I will never go. I don't ever want to find out. And people say, well, you're being closed-minded. Have at it.
Yep.
Yes. And when
I'm
you come
yep.
back because you can't sleep at night, at least I can. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But go
I'm
ahead. We'll
very
go with your thought about Skinwalker. What are you saying?
no, no, that's perfect. I'm closed-minded to a lot of things that are harmful to me, but
Right.
Skinwalker Ranch is where they've had it's this little bizarre plot of land in northern Utah. There's a TV show about it on History Channel, and it's apparently got decades of stories, and also of official like scientific and even government investigations. Now private investigations, but with a lot of scientific equipment. They've had stories of Bigfoot. They've had stories of UFOs, weird cryptid creatures, and then sort of these frankly demonic encounters where people have these nightmares that become contagious, that other people in their family and their friends start to have these. It's like a chain reaction. They call it the hitchhiker effect. Or they encounter things that are terrifying, but they can't see them, but they can like sense something evil. They can sense this like malevolent, cold kind of presence, and then they put on like night vision goggles and they see something there. So I can't again make sense of everything that's happened there. Maybe no one can, but there does seem to be evidence that there are things that operate beyond our perception, that perhaps don't have our best interests in mind, and that go beyond just some natural explanations. Uh, Now again, there's government interest in this place, just like there's government interest in these what these fighter pilots are seeing. This report, this whistleblower report. There does that mean that it's the government's interested because it's a foreign military? But the interesting thing about that report is that it says other foreign militaries are also interested in these things. And so what this whistleblower said is that our government has learned what other governments have learned. And so maybe no one really knows. And perhaps that's part of the secrecy. Perhaps it's embarrassing that they don't know what these things are that are outfoxing our fighter pilots, or that are, you know, are evading our radar lock, or that we can see on night vision, but we can't see with our eyes, like some kind of cloaking technology. And so I think there's this fear that if we can't find the answers, we don't want anyone else to know that, because we should be the people with the answers, right? And I think as Christians, we also feel that, like, if we can't make sense of this theologically, and if we can't technologically, understand it, then we can't, offer any answers to anyone. And that's a legitimately worrying thought that people have.
You mentioned a couple of things I want to touch base and piggyback on. Summoning the supernatural is something that many Christians would definitely advocate against doing. You definitely don't want to find yourself attracting demonic influence. And when we say that, this acknowledges the supernatural world. It acknowledges the supernatural, that demons and angels and God and Satan are real. And that's something that I think when it comes to trying to make sense of what is real as in extraterrestrial and what is spiritual in nature, such as interdimensional spiritual beings, such as demons, which can go in and out of our realm into their own realm. And that's a whole nother subject for another time. But it's of a topic, isn't it? So these things. And so that's why it's important for us to remain skeptical. I don't think we shouldn't have any skepticism. One person I talked to made a comment. He said, if these aliens are so advanced that they've crossed star systems and galaxies, what would a government of a small country on a different planet do to actually curtail your takeover of it? And so then, of course, people come back, well, they're just scouts. They're just scouts. Yeah, but how many scouts do you need to have to know, hey, we could take the city? Like in the Old Testament when uh um Jacob and Caleb went scouting the land, they said we could take it. That's two scouts that said yeah, the other 10 said no, right? How many scouts does it take? And so there are these valid counterpoints to that. And that's why the conversation needs to be open and not shunned, because the more information that you have, you can really make decisions. And most people lack, what they say, what does the Bible say? My people perish for the lack of knowledge. And when you have government agencies constricting the conversation for whatever agenda they may have, people actually become the casualties of it. And he also talked about how people in the Pentagon had religious reasons of why they wanted to be careful of some of this activity. And then last you talked about Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of people think Skinwalker Ranch is a portal point between dimensions. They actually think the reason why you have all these things having access here is because of the portal point. I had a guy on my show some years ago. His name is he used to go by Doomsday Doug. He talked about how in Roswell there were cultic things happening with some of the
Mm.
people behind the Roswell incident that I talked about earlier when I did the introduction to the show. There were occultic practices going on. And then next thing you know, you got Roswell. It's very interesting how some of this stuff connects and interconnects together. So there's that. Now I know what our listeners want to talk about. We want to talk about some of these whistleblower programs. And the newest one is called the Immaculate Constellation. Now, let's get a couple of things that I think we need to just kind of hone on when we talk about this discussion. Um, the problem with this program that the whistleblowing is saying is that this program and other programs do not have congressional oversight. That means even people in the government don't know about this. This is dangerous because you have someone behind the scenes making decisions that are going to affect billions of people.
Yeah, so this is a anonymous whistleblower that's talked to Michael Schellenberger, and then this has kind of gone on News Nation, Ross Coulthart, and some other journalists have looked into this. But this whistleblower has, I think, already talked to some of the congressmen that are on these oversight committees. But he has said that this program was what's called a USAP, so Unacknowledged Special Access Program. And that so a special access program is sort of like if you've seen the Born Identity and there's Treadstone, sort of this black program. And then especially the unacknowledged special access program, it is a carve out essentially where the Pentagon, the executive branch can create this basically a black budget program that doesn't really have to report to anyone. And there's this essentially a legal loophole that allows this. And I think there's even one other higher classification called a waived unacknowledged special access program. Tim McMillan from the Debrief has done a lot of investigating in this. He used to be a police investigator, and he's worked on government things, and so he has some great reading that maybe we can link to in the show notes if I can dig that up. But the interesting thing about this term, I mean, first of all, immaculate conception is where your mind immediately goes, right? As an association. So it's a very odd term, and even just when I first saw this discussion about this on Twitter, there were people saying, "Oh my gosh, this whole thing is obviously demonic because it's like this satanic counterfeit, right, of the Immaculate Conception." And there are like non-Christians saying this, that like this is really dark stuff, right? That what this is going on. Um, but what this whistleblower said is that, uh, or what he's alleging is that the government is studying a unknown origin of superior technology. So one of the items in this report is uh, these orbs that surrounded an F-22, fighter jet, and essentially locked onto it. So everywhere the jet would move, the orb would follow it, and they were so close to this jet that he had to leave the area, like on his patrol area. And another case, and this is even more bizarre, was a Navy aircraft saw an orange red sphere descend from high altitude, and after which they described a sense of unease and feeling as if they'd snapped out of a trance. So it had some kind of psychological or spiritual effect on them. And they also said that that orange red glow of this giant sphere did not illuminate the flight deck of their aircraft carrier and did not illuminate the ocean. So it was like a luminous light that didn't work like normal light. So
Almost
again,
like a
we're
mirage.
right, right. So was it just a like a hologram or some other kind of, technological psychological deception? Was this something supernatural? I mean, we see that, Paul talks about uh, even Satan masquerades as an angel of light. We don't really know how the light works from supernatural beings, or is this some kind of advanced non-human technology? And the whistleblowers point to all of this is the public deserves to know what these are, because these affect everyone. Whatever they are a superior technology that by its nature is a threat to us, because uh they are, you know out flying all of our fastest jets, and they basically have dominance over all of our naval ships. So if this thing wanted to snap its fingers and get rid of us, it basically could. And think back to when the Sputnik satellite went overhead, and the Russians beat us to space. Imagine if they had tried to stigmatize all the reports of that. Imagine if they tried to explain it away, and then just sort of work on something in secret to beat the Russians. We probably would not have beat the Soviet Union to the moon. We probably would not have NASA and then now SpaceX. If they had tried to keep all of that secret and to a tightly controlled group of people, and that's what a SAP, a special access program, it means that only a certain limited number of people can know what's in these reports. That's no way to make scientific progress. That's no way to have military readiness and national security. I mean, it's like the phrase we've all heard since 9/11: if you see something, say something. But somehow that doesn't apply to this. And look, if this is something that you know is outside of, let's just say for a second it's outside of the supernatural. Let's say it's not something that's in Revelation, and it's not something that's just a hoax or whatever. Let's say it's even something that's human from another nation or you know um, some other secret company or something. We should absolutely find out what it is. And so that's why next month in mid-November there's going to be a congressional hearing about all of this. And I think it was already planned before this came out, but I'm sure that this is going to come up now, because the whole point of our democracy is that it's by the people, it's for the people, that the voters, the Congress, that we get to be represented in these decisions. We aren't run like an aristocracy. We aren't run like a monarchy. That we are run by the people, that we should have access to these things. Now, sure, we don't all need access to, like, um the most secretive, like, military technology, because if you let the public know that, well, then the whole world knows that. But if we're talking about technological objects that are not ours, then there's really no logical reason why everyone shouldn't know about it, because then it could be something that we study, it could be something that we learn from. um but based on this and other reports, I think what's really going on is that there are people that want these secrets to themselves so that they can try to replicate them. And that's the other part of this report, is that or that might be the previous whistleblower, David Grush, who said that there's a reverse engineering program going on. And So there may be some private companies involved in all this that say, hey, we really want to keep all that to ourselves so that we can create the things that we sell to the military or to whoever, and no one else gets to touch this. That's a very strong possibility. I mean, money talks when it comes to government, and unfortunately, a lot of government is very much influenced by those high power lobbyists from these companies.
It's interesting. I'm going to read something that we sent over, and it's from Public, where basically it states that the Pentagon is illegally hiding secrets about UFOs. And it says here there is no evidence that any non-human or non, I'm sorry, there is no evidence that any non-human or extraterrestrial intelligence has visited Earth, according to a May 2024 report by the office the Pentagon created in 2022 to study unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, formerly called UFOs. Pentagon's All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARROW, assesses that the inaccurate claim that the USG is reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology and is hiding it from Congress is, in large part, the report concluded, the result of circular reporting from a group of individuals who believe this to be the case despite the lack of evidence. Well, here's the thing. For years, anytime someone said they saw something that didn't look right, you ridiculed them. So now you want people to trust you when you say, "Oh, there's nothing going on here." The reason why they're even acknowledging it is because video is capturing things and people are asking questions. What is that? Now, I understand you do want to keep military secrets secret. I think that's a good idea. No one needs to know all of your secrets, just like no one needs to know all your business. No one
Yeah.
needs to know everything. But if people are under threat of a superior technology, people need to know because if you don't want to have panicked, what fights against panic is information. So people may not like it, they may freak out, they may have their um, breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. Worldviews may crash. I understand that. But people are adaptable. God made us that way. And after they adapt to the information, they go, okay, we now know that the Klingons are coming. The Klingons are coming and they're going to declare war on us. So we could possibly make gah. I will volunteer to make gah. And so, as a welcome offer to the Klingons, maybe good cooking will stop the war. You never know. So you know what I mean? But if you have information, you actually control people's response to it. Instead of controlling the people, you actually control people's response because say, okay, we know about this. This is something we know. Sort of like if we know about other things. But then it could be, and this is where I probably get more conspiratorial, could be just the fact that there are people who want to keep the elites elite, what they call it the deep state. The elites want to remain elite, and the only way they can remain elite is to covet and hoard the information. So then, in the name of getting rid of the lesser, more populous people, they create divisions between people. And those divisions, that's why a lot of the rhetoric that's going on right now, you kind of like go, oh my gosh, you're going back in time. A lot of this racial tension, especially here in America, a lot of these racial tensions are just heightening and heightening. And you kind of go like, what are you being distracted from? That's one thing a lot of conspiratorial people say. What are we being distracted from? Particularly when you're starting to find out that the conspiracies are not conspiracies at all. They're
Yeah.
actual things happening. So in this topic of whistleblowers, let's talk about the lack of evidence they share. And I say this because in this particular case with the Immaculate Constellation, the whistleblower did not show the imagery associated with this UAP program. And that's one of the most frustrating things. It's like, show us what you're saying you expect us to believe. What are your thoughts to that?
Yeah, and just to build on this whole idea of special access programs, you know, I got a quote here from Schellenberger because he said, by law, the Department of Defense must notify the Gang of Eight, the chairpersons, the ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, and the majority and minority leaders of the House and Senate. So yeah, we don't all get to know. Maybe some of what the military knows, but certain members of Congress absolutely get to know by law and by the first article of the Constitution. And so that's really what this whistleblower is saying is, look, the whoever is running the Immaculate Constellation program, they are illegally blocking congressional oversight that is mandated by law. And so now we're in some really interesting political thriller territory, right? Because there are people that in the Pentagon, this report alleges, that are breaking the law. And so what are they going to do now? Are they double down? David Grush, the whistleblower from that, basically there's satellite images of these UFOs, and there's this reverse engineering program, and he knows the exact location, like in physical space where it exists. He said, look, I'm still bound by a non-disclosure agreement, but I can legally testify about this in what's called a SCIF, a secure compartmentalized facility. I can't remember what that stands for, but essentially a secretive location that, not an open hearing, but like a classified hearing of Congress. And as soon as he said that, he started facing retaliation. And so the inspector general of the intelligence community opened a case to look into this and saying, why is this guy being threatened, and why can he not get clearance to talk to Congress? Like, Congress should have clearance to talk to him about this. So there are definitely people that are trying to keep this under wraps, and to me, that's the most interesting part of this. Why are they trying to keep it a secret? What does that benefit? Who does that benefit? What are they protecting? Uh, what are they trying to promote through it? And again, I think money is the simplest explanation for this. I mean, there could also be a sort of hyper patriotism that's like, we don't want any other countries to know what we have. We could have some super advanced technology that's based on all this. I mean, there were when this whole program started, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, or the OSAP was the other name for this. This is what the New York Times article in 2017 talked about with Lou Elizondo. There were some scientific papers that came out of that about creating traversable wormholes, creating cloaking devices, creating faster than light travel, basically creating the kind of technology that these UFO reports are about. Well, let's say we do have that technology, either based on recovered alien spacecraft or just on advanced physics or something. I can see an argument being made, at least, and I'm not sure if I totally agree with this, but I can see an argument that we should not let anyone know about this technology, because then that gives up our technological edge against our adversaries. Okay, so that may be one reason. But I don't think that's the only reason, and here's why. Another thing that's come out recently is this Freedom of Information Act document that someone used FOIA to get a document out about what the US government knew about the Wuhan lab that was doing research into
Yes.
the coronavirus. And when this document was released, almost the entire thing was redacted. And there are entire pages where every single line was redacted. So now we're just supposed to use our imagination for what the government or the military or whoever it is that redacted that, what they know about this Chinese lab, how it relates to COVID. And and then we've seen social media companies censor conversations about this. We've seen people lose their jobs or their clearance or whatever. And there has to be some other kind of interest for classifying all of this. There has to be just some basic human reasons for why they don't want these secrets to get out. And I don't think it really serves the public interest. And but that's what these hearings in Congress should be able to get to the bottom of. Let's hope so. Because again, if we're going to have a true, constitutional republic, if we're going to have a democracy where we get to choose our own policies as a country and as a people, then we've got to know what's going on, and especially if like we're under threat of something that that could totally change our way of life.
Goes back to being human, doesn't it? Because you mentioned how the broader scope of this topic reaches into planetary defense, into technological advancement, and then you bring it all the way back down to just being human. People have the right to know what's going on in the world. And people are reasonable enough to understand you don't have to tell us everything. But when you deliberately stop information from people making the appropriate decisions, and then you ridicule and shut them down, especially during COVID. We could really see that in 2020. Like in COVID, in 2020, there were people losing their jobs because they did not want to take a vaccine they do nothing about. They did not want to have something put into their body. They did not want that. That is just an individual's right, but you were being forced to do it. If you don't do, you can't graduate. If you don't do, you can't work anymore. You have to shut down your business. And people at the time were severely divided by this because people were like, well, how come you're making me do this and I don't want to? At least let me make my own decision. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, right? And some people stood on that. I can remember, not to just to bring this into some context of what some of the conversations were, as African Americans, a lot of African Americans didn't want to do it because of past historical precepts of how the medical community have experimented on African Americans. And you remember the meme, Zach, that meme was going around. They said, when they, and they're talking about the elites, when they can do this and this, then I'll do it, you know. And they were saying, well, and then people, you were hearing reports saying, well, African Americans are the most vulnerable to this virus. And you look like, why is that? You're like, why is that? And those questions start to come to mind. So it goes back down to being human. Not that we're trying to talk COVID or anything, but this is what was happening during that very volatile time of the 20th century in 2020. Like 2020 was pivotal right now in how we understood how information was sent, how the technology was able to suppress information. Because now we're finding out, oh, this did happen. Oh, this, and you're like, so now you lie to me, right? Here I am trying to make a decision, and you're lying to me. And could have affected my health. I could have affected my kids' health. I could have affected my employer, my employees. All of this makes a difference. And so, yeah, it brings it right back down to earth. So even though we're talking about this broad scope, let's just bring it back down to earth, right, Zach? And I think that's one of the important things. Now, Zach, I'm not going to keep you too much longer because I know you got things to do, but I just want to, first of all, thank you for being with me on the show today as we talk about this. I didn't know if you want to touch another main topic about this before I let you go, or just introduce people to your writing and what you're working on, stuff like that. So you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just a final thought to bounce off what you said. I think the larger trend that we're seeing with this topic, with COVID, with openness about police activity, and everything from elections, is that we are living in a society with very low trust in leadership, very low trust in authority, and that's a dangerous place to be as a country. And so again, are leaders going to double down with the secrecy, with the gaslighting, with the lying, just the outright lying? Or is there going to be humility? Is there going to be transparency and honesty, and maybe even repentance, like public repentance? I don't think there's any way to win back trust of people, whether we're talking about the government or we're talking about a company, a school, a city. The only way to win back trust is to try to win it back. Um, you can't just sort of sweep things under the rug, especially in the days of the internet. Everything is viral, and I've seen some good and I've seen some bad examples of that. And just to say a good example, I mean, this is a terrible situation, but when there was a shooting at a school in Nashville, the Metro Police Department immediately put out the dash cam video of what happened. So that way, there's no question of what happened. There's no conspiracy theories. There's no like just judgment happening. It's like, here are the facts. And here, you can make up your own mind about it, but at least now you know what's happening. But I think this kind of openness and transparency is really the way forward in whatever organization we're going to talk about. There has to be that honesty, and because these things will come out, like the secret. I mean, Jesus even promises what is whispered in secret will be shouted from the rooftops. So ultimately and eternally, there is no secrecy. Like at the judgment, it says books will be opened, and everything that a person did, good or bad, is going to be pronounced because it's all being recorded right now. Every single one of us, our whole entire life is being recorded. So I think it's kind of silly that people think that they can just keep all these things secret, whatever it is. But I also think that, as you said, the other dynamic that's happening is that people get divided against one another, and that's also an intentional strategy that's being used against us. And I think whatever these, whatever topics we're going to talk about that are very controversial, I think there's a way for people to have better conversations and discussions about them. But it sometimes has to start with that acknowledgement that, hey, do you know that we're being pitted against each other?
Yeah.
And do you know that, and not just by nefarious human actors, but you look at Ephesians 6, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil. Whatever involvement they have with UFOs, like we know that there is a spiritual war against us that is trying to devour us, that is trying to distract us, make us demonize one another, and sort of fight to the death against one another. And Jesus said that for his church, his prayer is that we would be one, just like he and the Father are one. And so, any time that we feel that, especially as brothers and sisters in Christ, anytime we feel that push or that pull to really, divide from one another, I think we have to watch out for that because that's something that's against us. But that's something that I'm writing about in fiction. I'm currently working on a book where um, there are humans that are interested in the supernatural, but they're very against the presence of the supernatural. They don't want any kind of supernatural involvement in the world, and they will go as far as it takes to get rid of it. So imagine if uh, if people could create a technology superior to the chariots of fire that we see angels in, or to the apparently the flaming swords that angels can wield. Imagine if humans could make something even more powerful than that, and they want to get rid of this whole influence. That's what I'm writing about. Because I think that's within the realm of possibility for human hubris of thinking that we could overpower uh, God's, yeah, if not God himself, then God's domain in the supernatural world. Um, and I'm fascinated to think about, what would a world look like that gets sort of chopped up that way? Like, are you loyal to humans only, like humanism, or are you loyal to God and how God runs the world? Um, and ultimately, that's what a lot of these stories are. It's like who's in control, who gets power to be in control. But ultimately, do we trust that God is sovereign over all of this?
And I think it goes back to sovereignty. And I'm really glad that you ended it on that note there. And I'm not going to add too much to it, but say thank you again for being part of the Parker J. Cole shows. We talk about these very fantastical things in some ways, and they all interconnect in some manner. So I'm really glad you were with me today, Zach, to unpack this topic. And dear viewer, dear listener, if you want to get more information about Zach, his information is below in the show description. Make sure you follow him online. And we also forgot to mention Lorehaven, the Lorehaven podcast. I do want people to know more about that. We have been working together at Lorehaven now for about 5 or 6 years now, possibly more. You never know on internet connections, but they also have a podcast that showcase fantastical fiction, fantastical topics regarding fiction. Do interviews, they discuss topics, really good stuff. So you can share the show dynamics better than I can. So talk about Fantastical Truth, Fantastical podcast real quick.
Yeah. So the basic idea of Fantastical Truth is we want to focus on sci-fi, fantasy, and other speculative fiction that is written by Christian authors. And Christian books kind of run the gamut of the metaphorical, the literal, or just the symbolic and sort of the Christian worldview of any given genre. And so we talk to lots of authors of these stories. We talk about pop culture. We talk about, what's on the screen, what's in other books. And then we just talk a lot about theology and sort of the intersection of faith and the arts. And so we run that podcast every Tuesday. So you can find that on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, any other podcast platform.
And it's a really good podcast. I have been a guest on that show a couple of times. And like I said, I also write for Laura Haven. My specialties tend to be romance and horror. And there's stuff too in sci-fi. So I do have a plethora of interests. So so I always say I could flow with your crazy. I could definitely flow with your crazy. And so, Zach, once again, thanks for being with us. Dear listener, really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Parker J. Cole Show. You have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Just simply reply back to the video below, subscribe, and like for more content like this. Thank you so much for joining me. You have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day. And God bless.